Hi, everybody. Oh, my goodness. The echoes of our past. God. One thing I'd like to ask people, generally speaking, uh, is if they would like to have some questions answered, I'd be delighted to do the best I can with them, but I have to receive them. I can understand Ottawa not necessarily sending in too many questions since they really basically don't have any. But outlying areas, I love questions from you guys. I don't like questions from here because basically I don't get many. So I just take it for granted I'm not going to get very much. So since I'm basically talking to you out there, I appreciate your questions. I know it's very difficult for you to get down to the point where you actually are basically thinking deeply about the issues that relate to spiritual growth. Because, quite frankly, most of us in relationship to spiritual growth bounce along on the surface. And this is not a criticism, it's just how it works. We're basically really nervous about inner growth, and that means everybody. Inner growth is a basic relationship with walking into the unknown. And our personalities are really geared for engaging directly with not walking into the unknown, but walking into and repeating our relationship with what we have been in the past. We replay constantly our relationship with the past. And to interfere with that is basically getting a little bit nervous. The actions are always nervous and moving into spaces where we're facing emptiness. The emptiness does not do well with what we already know. What we already know does really, really well in the repeating of it. So this is not a grandiose way of seeing things. This is just an honest way of seeing things. Very difficult. I've never met a person who is actually trying to grow who hasn't had questions, but who basically find it very difficult to come up with them because they're really asking questions about something that is unknown. So how do you ask a question about what is unknown? It's much easier to ask a question about what you believe you already know and what others believe they already know. And therefore, in effect, it's safer because at least you have a kind of an idea of what the answer should be, even if it may not be that. But nonetheless, the answers are often, let's say, protective of the personality at its wondrous best. And that means it is not a negative thing not to be able to come up with a question. Because in relationship to trying to understand the depth of an inner growth, we search out how others have been involved with that, and then we come up with some possible way of seeing things. And once you see something the way you believe it really might be, there are no questions. This is a very difficult thing, and it's always been difficult. That's why so many groups have been involved with engaging with each other around ideas that are already and have already been there. So if you're really thinking about this, you realize that a relationship with inner growth is a bit disturbing to the personality. So why would anyone want to disturb the personality's way of being comfortable with itself. It's a dilemma, and it's a legitimate dilemma. So, my talking about Ottawa folks not being able to come up with some questions is really nonsense if they're actually trying to grow. If they're not actually trying to grow, then they're like all the rest of us, trying to legitimize the relationship that we already have with our personalities. And this is not a negative thing. This is a survival thing. I just want to bring this up in lieu of a few questions that Jennifer sent me while we were in Scandinavia and Germany. And I'd like to try and just chat about a few of them. Really, basically, these are, and Jen, I'm talking to you, these are questions that you're asking yourself. If you look at them like that and don't seek to find out perfect answers, you're safer. Because there's no perfect answers when you're engaging with experience that you've never had before, and when you're engaging with a relationship with growth that you may have had in a similar way, but you can't remember. Because, as you all know, as everyone knows, lifetimes are, the numbers are tremendous. And the reasons for having these things is you get another chance to engage with a relationship with growth. Forgetting some of the ways that you've actually learned, and then moving into territories when you are growing where states of consciousness begin to shift a little bit, where you begin to remember pieces of conscious awareness that is bordering directly on movement beyond the personal or beyond the personality's view of what is valid. Most of our life is spent seeking people who agree with us, especially when you're insecure. Most of our life, if we look at history, the people at this level seek to have a bunch of people around them that are kind of in a particular kind of a way, schooled in the manner that you believe or hope to believe. This makes it difficult on groups of people. It's traditionally noted all over and very much in all kinds of schools, by the way. But there are small pockets of people in the schools who cultivate ways of thinking and therefore believe that they're very valuable unto themselves. It's not spiritual growth, but it is survival. And it's an engaging, interesting manner of reconstructing form to elevate personality's need to survive. It's my understanding that as we walk into worlds like we walked into this one in the very beginning, that we walk into situations that are similar to how we've been involved with life before. Now, it takes various shapes. The shapes are not identical to how you were before, but there are lessons that are to be learned. Usually we take the other tact. Rather than learning these lessons, what we do is we defend against the lessons that are to be learned. And so we can't be the ones that need to learn these lessons. Others needed to learn those lessons. And this usually relates to family pockets or packets. And I tend to see our personalities as packets of energy. I wish you could see that, everybody. Packets of energy that have to be not disturbed, have no movement, because if there's movement, there's automatic vulnerability. There's always a great fear that an individual who isn't acting the way they normally act will not survive. There's always the great adjunct to these ways of seeing things. It really states something like this: if you engage the way you act, you're safe. If you do not know how you act, you're safer. Unfortunately, that is, on the surface, very true. Unfortunately, as well, at the same time, you don't have the willingness to think differently. Therefore, there's no movement. But there is intensity, and intensity favors movement. That's the way we've been taught. If you're intense and you're doing a job or whatever you're doing, you'll really succeed. Unfortunately, you can look at it from a different perspective. And I said unfortunately, because if you look at it from a different perspective, fear enters in. So if you look at it from a perspective that says, I see how I am, I see how I hold myself in a position that is not perfect and not imperfect, but it's situational. But what I see has a minute level of conscious awareness. Becoming more consciously aware is a detriment to how I am. You see my logic. Having more conscious awareness, however, is a detriment to remaining how you are. But it is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable. I hope everybody heard that. But only in relationship to the definition that you've already constructed within the emotional, mental form. That's us. Now that personality is not negative. If we looked at ourselves as a very large beingness with a multiplicity of lives and a multiplicity of ways of engaging with life, please try and hear this, a multiplicity of ways of engaging with life, and we come back into this structure to move forward and prepare better to be able to handle moments of unknowing. In our definition, then, as a personality, you would say, those are moments where I feel insecure. I do not know where my secure sense is unless I react and move back into a sense of security, which means bringing the personality orientation back into a place where it is continually validating a spot within this great cast of engagement with personalities, some tiny little spot, like a pimple on a hedgehog. Sorry about that. But that's reminiscent of a recognition that we are something beyond what we are in a moment here. A moment can be elongated all your life or not. Now that small spot is extremely valuable if one can become a little bit more consciously aware of how you function honestly within. Big stuff here, and not react negatively to it. For that matter, not positively either. Just say, wow, look at this. This is how I am. Don't tell anybody, for God's sake. Why? Because they will have an excuse to see you the way you're telling them you are. That takes them right away from seeing themselves. The old Christian traditions and other traditions as well, they repeatedly say, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. An old reference to a mystical system. Don't let your emotional dispositional process that guards and keeps you at bay from being anything other than what you are. Don't let that emotional system see the mental facility as something very constructive. But there's a trick here. Emotion and mind are together, and they support each other. I find this very, very interesting. I'm sure you do too, all of you who sit down and think about this in your own time. And in saying that, we realize that life and living life is situational. Rarely do people sit down. The old 19th century used to be interesting. They would sit every night, those who did this, and there are many who did not, and write about their day, their responses, their engagement with those responses, why this was so, why it was not so. Have a dialogue with a pen and a piece of paper. It brought out more emotion, because writing in a piece of paper brings out an emotional orientation, or it brings out how you are engaging, and then even on paper you begin to support the way you engage. The trick then is to notice that that's what you're doing. That is a process of the right hand. The mental facility linked with the emotional, dispositional process that relates directly to survival as well as the lower mental does, suddenly says, whoa, just a minute now, I saw something there. That aspect doesn't judge, doesn't elevate, just sees. The personality in its early stages is being cultivated to begin to learn how to see itself. Who tells us this? Many tell us this, but very subtly. Writers, artists, scientists who think something is really important and must be right, find out it's not. Then they say, whoa, just a minute. It has to be right. I thought it. Well, they don't think like that. Well, some of them don't think like that. That's why they have a thing called pure science. Purity in science is like purity in art. But it is reminiscent of a way of seeing that relates directly to protecting how you see and what you see, what you construct and how you construct it. This is double-edged sword. It's too bad, and it's great at the same time. It means we're in a movement, at least, towards a state where you can allow yourself to move to a place within yourself where you sense the vulnerability, the inadequacy of your belief in what you know is true and only true. It's like talking into the wind, about 100-mile-an-hour wind that protects the personality from finding out something different. All of you have seen this image of the thinker. Boy, it's everywhere. There's all kinds of these images. Statues are everywhere. Wherever you go, in Berlin, wherever you go in Norway, if you go to any kind of wonderful places and museums where you can look at these things. They're all over the place. But the thinker is an interesting thing. Since in our whole world we don't like anybody else being in charge of us, because it really gives the great difficulty to the personality's view of the importance of its own self-interest. It's then very hard to accept help from anybody. And those people who give help, they're considered to be what gives them the right to actually think that they're actually helping anybody? What gives them the right, as they know their relationship with that thinker part has nothing to do with the thinking of an individual. It has to do with the old concept of soul. And the deepening of relationship between the animal form, you and I as personalities, and the soul structure, which is indented in this animal form. Well, they had all kinds of theories about this in the ancient times, too. You should read history. It's quite interesting. But the issue is to draw links between one plane and another. Not for the purpose of protecting and knowing that this level is always right, but relating to the bringing together and the blending of an individual's personality into a state where it can be really honest without judgment internally. And not talk about it as a superior position. I hope everybody heard the last one. More perception only moves you into a level of understanding that relates directly to the idea that there is more than what you have. And more is the journey. And what you have is kind of a place where you're trying to make sense of things and keep a kind of balance so that you feel at least a little bit comfortable moving into beyond that place where you protect yourself from growth. These things are not so easy to deal with. Jennifer asks a question in here. The whole series of questions, actually. She's got 12 of them. Wow, one for every disciple. But she says, with all due respect, for every one of these questions is a part B and a part C. You can see how personality is interested. And to me, this is very valuable. I honor Jennifer's 12 questions.
You mean 36?
At 12, because she's not always put the B and C part. And I'm not knocking it. Those who react, like anyone inside, these reactions are to protect the fact that you don't ask the darn questions. To who? Not to me. To yourself. These questions are questions that Jennifer is asking herself. Interesting questions. You could say some of them don't make sense, but they do. The reason why they make sense is the questioner is asking the questioner. It's wonderful. I have to find one that says, through meditation and prayer, are we practicing or preparing to be in the flow with God, higher beings, or are we trying to expand ourselves so that we can notice that we are already in the flow with God or higher beings? Does that sound like a question? To me, it sounds like a real honest question. Now, who is she asking this question to? She has a sincerity. Jennifer, don't write these questions down. I'm going to talk about them. Unless you don't mind me talking about them. Write them down. Both are real. And in the view of some, there's another point. Many think because there's a reflex since Descartes. And Descartes was a believer in a higher level, God orientation. But here we have a bunch of folk all over the world who say we're too sophisticated for this now. But they could call it easily an energy flow that is not yet recognized by our equipment that lies within us all. And the words will change, of course. Something within us all that gives us life. I'll try and figure that one out. And used to be soul that took care of that. Now it's, this is kind of our nervous system does all this. It's a tool, however, no, not a tool. Our nervous system is the thing that does all this. I don't agree with all this stuff. Only because experience tells you that something is there that is not defined by those who say it isn't. And I think that's interesting as a question. So in this case, I would say both. I'm not talking about someone because she's talking about a seminar, and I don't really want to talk about seminars at this point. She's talking about an experience. When I was sitting and having trouble moving, I described it as past life experience. She says, I think if I recall correctly, I said could be, and may be a relationship with past experience, which really means past life experience, in that people can be involved with other levels in those past experiences, and they are not that far off from this experience. Unfortunately, personality gets in the way. And the dialogue that you have with engaging with life is related directly to the physical body, the emotional disposition, the need to have friends, the need to have suitors, the need to be recognized and cared for by other people. um, recognition physically, emotionally, and mentally, and then constructing a life around these things that actually protects and maintains your relationship with those things, which is an honest relationship with this world. There aren't very many people who do not do this. At a higher level, a level which from time to time can touch you, you can perceive the flow of that level of consciousness moving through you. And in those seconds, you are not interested in protecting you. You are not interested in being superior or having a whole bunch of people around you loving you or liking you anyway, or expressing yourself in some manner that indicates from your perspective how a person should be versus how other people should be. This is very, very difficult to grow through, but it is doable. So, but that's not really what might be influencing you, but it could influence you if you had lives like that before, or you had a life or many lives where you were involved with spiritual things. Those things would move in, but still you would question with your personality, which, by the way, is what Jennifer or all the rest of us might do if we're really interested in finding out these things. Then this is a doable thing. I always say, don't give up on you, meaning don't give up on being the person who wants to continue to grow into a state where you don't know anything. And there's a continual engagement with not knowing. Very difficult to handle this. That means you don't cultivate worlds. What you basically do is begin to learn how to soften down your reactive states as they relate to feeling vulnerable, not engage with as if you were important, not engage with as if you weren't important. Any of these things that occur touch us in our personality, which is the form that is being constructed to handle entry into states that we have not experienced. Not the ones we have only, but that we've not experienced. Preparation is what we're all involved with. I have no disrespect for a friend of mine who asked me, and matter of fact, I have great respect for him, asked me if I could give him any hints as far as teaching is. I've been teaching for over 40 years in this stuff. Doesn't mean very much. I said, no, I'm still learning. I'm just an apprentice. What's it mean? My hope is that every time I engage with the teaching process, I learn from it. About me. About others. Because as you broaden out your relationship with perception, you understand more about others. They never get it. Just be hopeful that you do. Even then, you'll miss stuff as it relates to you. Even then, you'll miss stuff as it relates to them. So compassion is a really valuable thing. Judgment, smart remarks, no consequence whatsoever. It's all part of the natural, normal delivery that occurs when you're protecting against fear. So, there isn't a person that I'm even speaker who hasn't made smart remarks, who hasn't been feared or fearful. And to take a step into a world where actually that world teaches you something that doesn't agree with your personality's view of it. And you have to be willing to allow yourself to learn from that point as if you were a learner, as opposed to a so-called knower of facts, according to whoever else may have given them to you. It's a very difficult area. And Jennifer's thinking on paper is a treasure. Because, in fact, she is thinking and attempting to learn. She's nervous about it. Thanks, Jennifer. So, I'll try and do another one if I can. One really interesting one, I thought, of course, I'm prejudiced about this. As the hand positions you teach us, are the hand positions you teach us, see, I can't even read, an extension or expansion of Kriya Yoga meditation? Well, it's really interesting. Try this one on for size, Jennifer. Every single movement we ever make is a movement that relates to an engagement with a living flow of force. We have a strong determination to believe that we are in charge of that force. Because if we thought that we weren't in charge, we'd be so scared. We would not know what to do. And these real Kriya movements, or movements that are related to another level, because they're state dependent on the conscious awareness level, on the unconscious level, we do them all the time. You reflexively engage with life, often, most often, unconsciously. If you do them consciously, you do those things because most often you are replicating how you normally function or how you have been taught to function. In other words, you copy other people's way of engaging, adjust it for your own use, and unconsciously, reflexively respond that way, whether it's conscious or unconscious. How could you be conscious when you unconsciously, reflexively do these things? Well, you can be conscious because you maintain a way of engaging unconsciously and use them consciously. You know how you function. And the next trick is to say, okay, I cut that. That's what I do. That's a conscious step. Now, your catching it alludes to the idea that your personality caught it. And it alludes to that idea for good reason. Because you're building a new personality perspective that allows you to see how you function. It takes a lot of courage to do that. It takes almost no courage to react. None whatsoever. But in our world, when you come up with a reactive engagement, people are entertained. And we need to be entertained. Because we're not doing anything anyway, you might as well be entertained. A good entertainer helps the day go by. you better entertain yourself, because it will help you to engage with and handle your relationship with you. Because inside of you, that flow is engaging, trying to help you to see that which is hidden from you. No one likes to hear that one. But boy, when you are beginning to notice, you also start to notice that there's an unconscious reflex inside of you that validates how you function. And you think no one else is going to see it. As a matter of fact, you don't even think about it. You just live it. But people are practicing and moving in a direction towards becoming more able to see themselves engaging in lives with no disrespect, no elevated honoring, just noting. That's a process of a possible maturation of an individual. So that when a person, here's the purpose, when a person actually notes the difference inside them of something else that is different than the personality and how it normally acts, then it can actually recognize there is something inside that is trying to be helpful and broaden out how the personality is constructed so that it can engage with and understand not only itself better, but others better, so that it doesn't have to act out because of the natural tendency to be fearful that lies within. That fear is in direct relationship to the idea of survival. The fear that you will not survive if you do not act in a particular way that elevates you as an individual. And you can do that by putting others down or dealing with authority in some manner that makes you the authority. And in fact, that's not helpful, but that is a part of the journey. If you could possibly see that's only a part of the journey, then you can begin to pull back from it. And visit the world of kriya. Now, that's a Hindi Sanskrit word. All it means is higher levels of engagement can move your physical form, your emotional form, and your mental form. But you would not like that to happen unless it was doing the things that you wanted it to do. Wow, what a statement. It's not a negative statement, it's just an honest statement. And none of us are exempt from these things. None of us at all. Ever had an idea in your head that was so profoundly valuable to you, you couldn't move through it? It was the only one that was true. It happens all the time. As a matter of fact, very ingeniously, it's training for a time when you notice an idea and its truth glowing in you, and you must speak it out. Even no matter how dumb it sounds to other people's ears. This takes more courage than most of us have. But nonetheless, it's a kriya. It's a vocal kriya. And it's not an angry one. It's not a dispositional one that comes out of validating importance personally. It's just an expression that would shock you. For example, if you have a boisterous personality, you might say it as if you're hearing it for the first time. Now, anyone that's paying attention would notice that that didn't come from you, because you're too boisterous. But we're not schooled yet to notice the words, to notice the ideas that come out of other people's mouths that are coming from a deeper level. The level of the thinker, the soul, that goes beyond, and that is a bridge between these planes and higher planes. But we're slowly learning, perhaps, but it makes us nervous. And this devalues no one. No one has not been nervous. That's a double negative, right? All of us have been nervous. And that too is preparation for times when the vulnerability of deeper knowledge expresses itself within the mind of an individual, and the intellect or the personality of that individual knows fully that it is not out of the brain, it is out of mind. And for that one glorious moment, we're touched with the recognition that there is something within us that is beyond what we want to control. That's a kriya. That's all it meant. Even in reading some of the books about kriya yoga, you notice that the engagement is consistent. You have to do this and you have to do that. You have to do this. That's only like a catalyst. Energy flows through us, and we're not even willing to allow ourselves to recognize that one. We're much easier with intensity expresses itself through us, especially when we're validating what we believe has to be true or not true, judging others, engaging with others, or this versus that, groups, same thing. Not helpful in the growing process. But the expression of a kriya from a higher state is a movement related to energy, linked to higher states. And remember, it's just a word. We are human beings. We think if we know a word, then we understand that word. And we do not necessarily understand it. We understand it with an intellect. But when it expresses itself, the reality is that we are not individually, personally, the expressor. We are the tool. And who wants to hear that one as a spiritual being, so-called? But, of course, there are a multiplicity of states and movements through these states engage with and move our personal orientations beyond the limitations of our individualistic and independent orientations that relate directly to the value of a so-called individual and how we function. All very confusing, Jennifer, but not. We are constantly in a movement towards growth. I've always thought and always said the difficulty is allowing ourselves to see our relationship with us as we are now, with no protection about that self, and being willing to go beyond where we are right now. We live in the past. We protect in the present. Reflexively, we fear to move beyond those protective, natural, normal responses that hold us in a position with great respect that if we're not held, at least to some degree, we think we will fall apart. And it sure feels that way from time to time. It's a wonder how creative and how courageous the human psyche is. At one point, we may even be open to knowing how courageous each and every one of you are, and move slightly forward into a space where you know you want to protect the personality you've already have, no matter what it is. Yet you don't, and you move forward, and you're okay with tiny steps that literally create a persona or a personality that includes not only this life, but a sequence of other lives that enable these higher forms to engage with this level of living form. I wish everybody a tremendous good night and a great and wondrous growing movement. Good night all.